The tears that shook the NBA. The most dangerous thing Victor Wembanyama did that night was not block a shot, hit a three, or drag the San Antonio Spurs into the NBA Finals. The most dangerous thing he did was cry, because the second those tears hit his face on national television, the entire NBA stopped talking about the scoreboard and started talking about his soul. San Antonio had just survived a brutal Game 7 against the Oklahoma City Thunder. The defending champions were gone, the Spurs were back in the finals for the first time in more than a decade, and Wembanyama, the two-year-old giant carrying the future of the league on his shoulders, finally let the pressure leave his body. He hugged his teammates. His eyes turned red. His emotions spilled out in front of millions. To most fans, it was beautiful. It was raw. It was the kind of moment that reminds you these players are not machines. They are young men chasing history under a level of pressure most people will never understand. But Kevin Garnett saw something different. The same Kevin Garnett who once sat with Wembanyama for hours, talking about mentality, fire, discipline, and what it takes to become great, suddenly went on his podcast and questioned whether the young Spurs superstar was truly ready to win it all. Garnett did not treat those tears like proof of passion. He treated them like a warning sign. He said Wembanyama still needed to feel pain. He said the Spurs looked too satisfied. He said the finals were not the place for that kind of emotional release. And then he dropped the prediction that lit the whole basketball world on fire. Knicks in 6. Just like that, a celebration became a controversy. A mentor became a critic. And Wembanyama's biggest moment turned into the first real test of his identity as the NBA's next face. Because this is no longer just about San Antonio versus New York. This is about old school toughness versus a new kind of greatness. It is about whether showing emotion makes you weak or whether hiding it is the real burden. So before this story explodes even further, tell me where you are watching from right now. Comment your city and press 1 if you believe Wembanyama's tears were the sign of a future champion. Press 2 if you think Kevin Garnett was right. And if you want more NBA stories with real drama, real emotion, and real stakes, subscribe to the channel right now. The Game 7, that changed everything. Before Kevin Garnett ever opened his mouth, before social media split into two sides, before Wembanyama's tears became the most debated image in basketball, there was a game. And that game was war. Game 7, Spurs versus Thunder. On the road, inside Oklahoma City's building, against the defending champions, against a team that had looked nearly untouchable all season. This was not some easy step toward the final. This was the kind of night that exposes every weakness, every fear, every young player who was not built for the moment. And somehow, San Antonio did not break. The Spurs came out swinging early, building a double-digit lead and forcing Oklahoma City to chase the game. But the Thunder were champions for a reason. They kept coming back. Every time San Antonio looked ready to take control, OKC punched back. Twice, the Thunder even grabbed the lead. And for a few terrifying minutes, it felt like the young Spurs were about to collapse under the weight of the moment. But that collapse never came. Wembanyama was dealing with foul trouble. The crowd was roaring. The pressure was getting heavier with every possession. And then came the play nobody expected. Luke Garnett, who had barely played, came flying into the frame for a chase down block that completely changed the energy of the fourth quarter. Oklahoma City had a fast break chance to cut into the lead, maybe even flip the momentum for good. Instead, Garnett erased the shot at the rim, and on the other end, San Antonio answered. That was the moment the Thunder never fully recovered from. From there, the Spurs showed something people had been questioning all season. Poise. Not just talent, not just height, not just highlights. Poise, the ability to stay calm when the defending champs are throwing everything at you, the ability to survive when your superstar is on the bench, the ability to finish when the entire arena is waiting for you to panic. And when the final buzzer sounded, the scoreboard said Spurs 111, Thunder 103. But the real story was bigger than the score. Wembanyama had led his team into the NBA Finals. 7 Spurs scored in double figures. San Antonio had taken down the defending champions in their own building, and Wemby, after carrying expectations that would crush most players, finally let himself feel it. That is why the tears matter. They were not random, they were not weakness, they were the release after 7 games of pressure, doubt, noise, and survival. They were the sound of a young star realizing that the future everyone promised had just arrived faster than anyone expected. Garnett turns the tears into a warning. Then Kevin Garnett entered the conversation, and everything changed. This was not just another former player looking for attention. This was KG, the big ticket, one of the loudest, fiercest, most emotional champions the NBA has ever seen. A man who built his entire career on intensity. A man who screamed through possessions like every rebound was personal. a man who knew exactly what it meant to carry pain, pressure, and expectation for years before finally reaching the top. So when Garnett looked at Wembanyama crying after Game 7, people expected him to understand. Instead, he attacked the moment. On his podcast with Paul Pierce, Garnett made it clear that he did not like what he saw. To him, Wembanyama's tears were not just emotion. They were a sign that the young star might have released too much too soon. Garnett believed the Spurs looked satisfied after winning the West, as if the job was already finished when the real mission had not even started. And then he went deeper. He said Wembanyama needed to feel pain first. Real pain. The kind of pain that comes from losing, falling short, watching someone else lift the trophy, and carrying that disappointment into the next season. In Garnett's mind, that suffering is part of becoming a champion. You do not just walk into greatness. You earn it through heartbreak. That is the old school NBA mentality talk. But the reason his words hit so hard was because they were aimed at a 22-year-old who had just beaten the defending champions on the road in Game 7. Wembanyama had not folded. He had not disappeared. He had not run from the moment. He had delivered. And still, Garnett turned the most human part of his victory into evidence against him. Then came the prediction. Knicks in 6, not Spurs in 7, not a close battle, not respect for the betting favorite. Garnett said New York would finish the job in 6 games because San Antonio, in his eyes, was not emotionally ready for the next level. That one sentence transformed the entire final. Suddenly, Spurs versus Knicks was no longer just a matchup. It became a judgment. Every Wembanyama possession would now be measured against Garnett's words. Every miss would feed the critics. Every block, every bucket, every stare into the crowd would feel like a response. And whether Garnett meant to motivate him or expose him, he handed Wembanyama something dangerous. A reason to prove him wrong. The mentor who suddenly became the critic. What made Kevin Garnett's words sting was not just the criticism. It was the history behind it. Because months before he questioned Wembanyama's readiness on a podcast, Garnett was not standing across from him as an enemy. He was standing in front of him like a teacher. During the summer of 2025, Wembanyama did something most young stars would never do. He did not just train quietly and wait for praise. He went searching for knowledge. He wanted to understand greatness from the inside. He wanted to know what separated talented players from champions. And one of the people he reached out to was Kevin Garnett. That alone says everything about Wemby's mindset. He was already one of the most hyped players in NBA history. He already had the size, the skill, the defensive instincts, the global attention, and the franchise built around him. But instead of acting like he had all the answers, he chased the people who had already survived the fire. Garnett later admitted that Wembanyama got his number and asked him to come watch his workout. At first, KG thought it was unusual, but he showed up. And what he found was not a soft young player looking for compliment. He found a 7'4" superstar who wanted the truth. For more than 2 hours, they talked on a football field. Garnett brought the same energy he always brings. Loud, intense, animated, completely unfiltered. And Wembanyama did not flinch. He listened, he absorbed, he processed every word like a student who knew that one sentence could someday matter in June. That is when Garnett described him as controlled chaos. That phrase matters now more than ever because Garnett saw the fire in him. He saw the intelligence. He saw that Wembanyama was not empty hype. He was thoughtful, deliberate, and dangerous in a way the league had not fully understood yet. KG praised the way Wemby took his time before answering questions. He noticed that the young star did not rush his thoughts. He studied everything. So when that same Garnett later watched Wembanyama cry and called it a problem, it felt personal. Not because Wemby needed Garnett's approval, but because Garnett had seen the work behind the emotion. He had seen the discipline. He had seen the hunger. He knew this was not a player celebrating too early because he was satisfied. This was a player who had emptied himself to reach the final, and that is why the criticism hit different. It was not just a legend doubting a young star, it was a mentor challenging the very student who came to him for the blueprint. Wembanyama was not built like everyone else. To understand why Wembanyama's tears were so misunderstood, you have to understand how he prepared for that moment. Most young stars spend the offseason trying to get stronger, sharper, faster, and louder. They work on the jumper, they add muscle, they post workout clips, they remind the world they are coming. Wembanyama did something different. He went quiet, he traveled to China, and trained at a Shaolin temple, far away from the noise of NBA cameras, podcasts, hot takes, and American sports television. While other players were enjoying the off-season spotlight, Wemby was waking up before sunrise, working on breathing, discipline, meditation, movement, and control. That matters because Wembanyama was not just training his body, He was training his mind. For a player built like no one the NBA has ever seen, the biggest challenge was never only basketball. It was balance. How does a 7'4" superstar handle the pressure of being called the future before he has even reached his prime? How does he carry a franchise, a country, and a global fan base without losing himself? His answer was discipline. After China, he came back to the United States and worked with Hakeem Olajuwon, one of the most skilled big men in basketball history. Then he met with Kevin Garnett, one of the most intense competitors the sport has ever produced. That path was not random. It was a blueprint from Hakeem. Wemby could study footwork, patience, angles, and the art of dominating without rushing. From Garnett, he wanted mentality, edge, fire, the emotional foundation of a champion. That is what makes the criticism so complicated. Wembanyama was not some careless young star who stumbled into the finals by accident. He was building himself piece by piece, monk by monk, legend by legend, lesson by lesson, and the results came fast. He opened the season like a warning shot. He dominated both ends of the court. He protected the rim, stretched the floor, punished mismatches, and made the impossible look routine. Every month, the league looked less like it was waiting for Wembanyama to arrive, and more like it was already trying to survive him. But beneath the blocks, highlights, and viral clips was something deeper. Wembanyama was learning how to carry pressure without becoming someone else. He could be calm without being cold, emotional without being weak, different without apologizing for it. So when he cried after Game 7, that was not a crack in the armor. That was the armor finally opening for one honest second. Wembanyama finally answered without saying Garnett's name. Wembanyama did not need to scream to make his point. He did not need to go on a podcast. He did not need to post a long message online. He did not need to call Kevin Garnett out by name or turn the finals into a personal feud before Game 1 even began. All he had to do was answer one question, honestly. When a reporter asked him about those tears after Game 7, Wembanyama paused and gave the kind of answer that felt bigger than basketball. He talked about the fear of judgment, the pressure to behave a certain way, the invisible rules athletes are expected to follow when the cameras are on and the world is watching. And then he made it clear, he refused to carry the burden of hiding his emotions. That sentence changed the entire conversation, because suddenly, this was not just about whether a young superstar cried too early. It was about who gets to define tough. It was about whether NBA greatness has to look angry, silent, cold, and untouchable. It was about whether a player can feel everything and still be built for the biggest stage. For decades, basketball culture has celebrated a certain image of the killer. The player who never reacts. The player who looks dead-eyed in pressure moments. The player who treats every victory like it means nothing because the job is not finished. There is power in that image, but it is not the only version of power. Wembanyama is showing something different. He is not trying to copy Michael Jordan's stare, Kobe Bryant's obsession, Tim Duncan's silence, or Garnett's fire. He is building his own language of greatness, calm when he needs to be calm, emotional when the moment deserves emotion, unafraid to let people see that the game actually matters to him. That is what makes his response so dangerous. He did not sound defensive. He sounded clear. He did not sound like a kid begging critics to understand him. He sounded like a young man drawing a line and saying, "This is who I am, and I am not changing just because the old rules make you uncomfortable." And for the Spurs, that matters, because their entire finals run now depends on whether Wembanyama can stay centered while the noise gets louder. Garnett's words are out there. The Knicks are waiting. The cameras are watching every expression on his face. But if Wembanyama truly believes what he said, then the tears were never a weakness. They were a declaration. The double standard inside Garnett's criticism. Here is where Kevin Garnett's criticism becomes complicated. Because if there is one thing nobody can ever say about Garnett, it is that he played without emotion. This was not Tim Duncan quietly walking back on defense with the same face after every possession. This was Kevin Garnett, the man who screamed before games, screamed during games, screamed after big plays, pounded his chest, clapped in opponents' faces, and treated every regular season possession like it was a battle for his basketball soul. His greatness was emotional. That fire made him terrifying. It made him impossible to ignore. It pushed teammates, rattled opponents, and gave every team he played for a heartbeat. Garnett did not just play basketball. He burned through it. So when he criticizes Wembanyama for being emotional, the question becomes obvious. Is emotion really the problem, or is it only certain kinds of emotion? Because Garnett's emotion looked like rage. It looked like intensity. It looked like war. In an NBA culture, that kind of emotion has always been easier to celebrate. Fans call it passion. Coaches call it competitive fire. Former players call it a championship mindset. But Wembanyama's emotion looked different. It looked vulnerable. It looked honest. It looked like a two-year-old finally letting the pressure escape after surviving the hardest series of his life. And because it came through tears instead of anger, some people immediately treated it like weakness. That is the double standard. One man screams, and people say he wants it more. Another man cries, and people ask if he is ready. But both emotions come from the same place. Both say the game matters. Both reveal that the player is fully invested, fully present, fully alive inside the moment. The difference is not commitment, the difference is presentation. And that may be what Wembanyama is quietly challenging. He is not rejecting toughness. He is rejecting the idea that toughness has to wear only one face. He is showing that a player can be disciplined, dominant, fearless, and still human enough to feel the weight of what he just accomplished. That is why Garnett's comments hit such a nerve. They revealed a generational divide. Garnett came from an era where pain was often swallowed, hidden, and turned into aggression. Wembanyama represents a generation more willing to say the quiet part out loud. Pressure is real, emotion is real, and pretending otherwise does not make you stronger. It just makes you harder to understand. Wembanyama is rewriting what an NBA superstar can look like. Victor Wembanyama was never going to fit perfectly into the old NBA superstar mold. He is too tall, too skilled, too strange, too thoughtful, too global, and too comfortable being different. He does not move like the big men who came before him. He does not talk like most young stars under the spotlight. He does not seem interested in performing toughness just to satisfy people who think greatness has to look one specific way. And that is exactly why this story matters. Wembanyama is not just a French player trying to survive in the NBA. He is a new kind of face for the league. He grew up outside the American basketball machine, but now he is standing in the middle of it, carrying one of the most respected franchises in league history back toward the biggest stage. That creates pressure most fans never see. Every interview is analyzed. Every facial expression becomes content. Every emotional moment becomes a debate. If he smiles too much, people question his edge. If he stays quiet, people call him distant. If he cries after making the finals, a Hall of Famer says maybe he is not ready. That is the impossible box modern superstars live inside. But Wembanyama seems determined not to shrink himself to fit it. He loves chess, books, quiet routines, discipline, and details. He trained with monks, studied legends, and built a lifestyle around control. Yet when the moment became overwhelming, he did not pretend to be made of stone. He let the world see what the journey had cost him. That combination is what makes him different. He can be methodical and emotional. He can be calm and intense. He can reject the old performance of toughness while still being the most feared defensive force on the floor. He can speak softly and still dominate loudly. For the NBA, that is a major shift. The league has always had international stars, but Wembanyama feels like something bigger. A player who may not just change how basketball is played, but how basketball greatness is understood. He is not asking American basketball culture to erase itself. He is simply refusing to erase himself inside it. And that is why Garnett's criticism may age poorly. Because if Wembanyama wins while being exactly who he is, then the conversation changes forever. The tears do not become a warning sign. They become part of the mythology. The quiet routines, the strange training, the emotional honesty, the global background, all of it becomes proof that greatness does not need one personality, one culture, or one emotional language. Sometimes the future arrives looking different, and sometimes the old guard mistakes different for weakness. The finals became Wembanyama's answer. Now everything moves to the finals, and every possession has a shadow over. Spurs versus Knicks should already be big enough on its own. San Antonio, back on the championship stage after years of waiting. New York, desperate to bring home a title its fans had been dreaming about for more than half a century. Two historic franchises, two starving fan bases, one trophy sitting in the distance. But Kevin Garnett added something personal. He did not just pick the Knicks. He questioned the emotional foundation of the Spurs' best player. He looked at Wembanyama's most vulnerable public moment and basically said, "That is why I do not believe you are ready." That is why Game 1 no longer feels like a normal finals opener. It feels like a response waiting to happen. Because Wembanyama does not need to win an argument on social media. He does not need to fire back in a press conference. He does not need to mention Garnett's name or turn this into a public feud. The cleanest answer is basketball. A blocked shot at the rim, a three over a smaller defender, a calm pass out of a double team, a defensive possession where the Knicks suddenly realize there is no easy angle, no safe floater, no clean layup. That is where Wembanyama can speak loudest. But the challenge is real. The Knicks are not walking into this series as background characters in Wemby's story. They are physical, hungry, and dangerous. They have the kind of toughness that New York fans love. Relentless pressure, hard drives, bodies on the floor, and a city behind them that believes this might finally be their year. That is exactly why Garnett chose them. He believes their experience, physicality, and hunger can expose a young Spurs team that may have already spent too much emotion just getting here. He believes New York can turn the finals into pain, the kind of pain he thinks Wembanyama still needs to feel. But that belief comes with risk. Because if Wembanyama uses those words as fuel, Garnett may have accidentally created the worst version of him for the Knicks to face. Focused, wounded, calm, and motivated by someone he once respected. That is the real danger. A superstar does not always need hatred to reach another level. Sometimes disappointment is enough. Sometimes hearing a mentor doubt you cuts deeper than any trash talk from an opponent. Sometimes the sharpest motivation comes from the person who once told you they saw greatness in you, then publicly questioned whether you had enough of it. So when Wembanyama steps onto that finals floor, he will be carrying more than San Antonio's hope. He will be carrying every debate about toughness, emotion, culture, youth, and pressure. He will be carrying the question Garnett forced onto him: are you ready? And the only answer that matters now is the one written on the scoreboard. The lesson behind the tears. In the end, this story was never only about Victor Wembanyama crying. It was about what people expect greatness to look like. For years, the NBA has taught fans to respect the player who never blinks, never breaks, never shows too much, never lets the world know how heavy the moment really feels. That version of toughness is real. It has built champions. It has created legends. It has shaped the mentality of players like Kevin Garnett, who turned pain into fire and used that fire to survive one of the most demanding careers in basketball. But Wembanyama is showing that there may be another way. Maybe toughness is not hiding every emotion. Maybe toughness is carrying the pressure, surviving the battle, delivering when the lights are brightest, and still being honest enough to admit that the journey meant something. Maybe a player can cry after a victory and still be the most dangerous man on the floor 2 nights later. That is the strategic lesson for San Antonio. The Spurs cannot let this series become an emotional trap. They cannot play the finals trying to prove Kevin Garnett wrong on every possession. They have to stay disciplined. They have to trust their spacing, their defense, their patience, and the calm identity that got them here. Wembanyama does not need to become louder, angrier, or colder to answer the critics. He only needs to remain himself. That may be his greatest advantage. Because when a superstar knows who he is, the noise loses power. The jokes, the predictions, the criticism, the doubts, they can still be heard, but they no longer control the story. And if Wembanyama can take all of this pressure, all of this attention, all of this judgment, and turn it into focused basketball, then Garnett's criticism may become the spark that pushes him into another level. For Garnett, the lesson is different. Sometimes the next generation does not reject the old one. Sometimes it simply evolves past it. Wembanyama did not disrespect Garnett's fire. He went looking for it. He wanted to learn from it. But learning from a legend does not mean becoming a copy of that legend. It means taking the wisdom, leaving the limits, and building something new. That is how sports move forward. The young learn from the old. The old challenge the young, and somewhere between criticism and response, the game changes. So if Wembanyama wins this championship, those tears will not be remembered as weakness. They will be remembered as the moment before the storm. The moment a two-year-old stopped pretending that greatness had to be emotionless. The moment he showed the world that being human and being elite can exist in the same body, and even if he loses, the message still matters. Because young athletes watching him need to understand something deeper than basketball. You do not have to hide every feeling to be strong. You do not have to turn every emotion into anger. You do not have to perform toughness for people who are not carrying your burden. Real strength is knowing yourself, respecting others, learning from criticism, and still choosing peace over bitterness. That is the human side of this story. Kevin Garnett gave his opinion. Wembanyama gave his truth. Now the finals will give the answer. And no matter who lifts the trophy, one thing is clear. The NBA is watching a new kind of superstar grow in real time. Not perfect, not finished, not untouchable, but honest, disciplined, fearless, and different enough to make the old guard uncomfortable. That is usually how the future announces itself. Now, I want to hear from you. Comment 1 if you believe Wembanyama's emotion makes him stronger. Comment 2 if you think Kevin Garnett was right about championship pain. Comment your city and tell me where you are watching from. And if you enjoy NBA stories with real drama, real emotion, and real lessons behind the headlines, make sure you like this video, share it with another basketball fan, and subscribe to the channel for the next story.